There was once a city so powerful, people believed it could never fall. Its walls were legendary, its kings ruled over a mighty empire, and its breathtaking wonders became the stuff of legend. But then, almost overnight, Babylon vanished from history. How could the greatest city of the ancient world simply disappear? And what secrets are still buried beneath its ancient ruins, waiting to be uncovered? This is the forgotten story of Babylon. To understand Babylon, we have to travel back to where civilization itself first began. Long before the rise of Greece, and centuries before the Roman Empire, there was a fertile land stretching between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Today, we know this place as Iraq, but thousands of years ago, it had another name, Mesopotamia, a name that simply means the land between rivers. Those two rivers changed everything. They brought fresh water, rich, fertile soil, and something people desperately needed, a chance to settle down and build permanent homes. Over time, small farming villages grew into busy towns. Those towns became thriving cities, some of the very first cities the world had ever seen. This was where people learned how to grow enough food to support entire populations, where merchants traded with lands hundreds of miles away, where towering temples rose above the skyline, and where one of humanity's earliest writing systems was created, allowing ideas, stories, and laws to live on long after the people who wrote them were gone. Every year, merchants crossed these lands carrying valuable goods. Travelers arrived from distant kingdoms. Soldiers marched across the plains. Kings dreamed of building kingdoms greater than the ones before them. Some cities became wealthy. Others disappeared so completely, it's almost as if they never existed. But among all of them, one city was different. One city would rise above every rival, becoming the heart of an empire, and a name the world would remember for thousands of years. That city was Babylon. Around 4,000 years ago, Babylon wasn't the greatest city in the world. In fact, it was just another small kingdom, surrounded by powerful rivals and fighting simply to survive. Life in ancient Mesopotamia was unpredictable. Kingdoms were constantly at war. Borders changed almost every year. One ruler would rise to power, only to be replaced by another not long after. Every king wanted the same things: more land, more wealth, more power. It was a world where empires could be built and destroyed in a single generation. Then, everything changed. One man stepped onto the stage of history. His name was Hammurabi. When Hammurabi became king, Babylon was far from an empire. But he saw something others didn't. He believed his small city could become the most powerful kingdom in all of Mesopotamia. Instead of rushing into battle, he played the long game. He formed alliances with neighboring rulers. He strengthened his army. He watched. He waited. And when the time was right, he struck. One by one, Babylon's rivals began to fall. Some were defeated on the battlefield. Others were outmaneuvered through careful planning and clever diplomacy. With every victory, Babylon grew larger, stronger, richer. Within just a few decades, the small kingdom that few had feared became the dominant power in Mesopotamia. But Hammurabi wanted to leave behind more than military victories. He understood that conquering an empire was one thing. Keeping it together was something else entirely. People from different cities, cultures, and traditions now lived under one ruler. Without common rules, chaos would follow. So Hammurabi did something remarkable for his time. He ordered his laws to be carved into a massive stone pillar, where everyone could see them. The rules didn't exist only in the king's memory anymore. They were written down, permanent, visible, public. Whether someone was rich or poor, powerful or ordinary, the law applied to everyone. Today, we know these laws as the Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest surviving written legal codes in human history. Some of its rules were surprisingly advanced for the ancient world. Others were incredibly harsh. Perhaps the most famous was the phrase, "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." To us, many of these punishments seem cruel, but at the time, something had changed forever. Justice was no longer based entirely on the changing moods of a king. For the first time, ordinary people could point to written laws that everyone was expected to follow. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was a revolutionary one. By the end of Hammurabi's reign, Babylon was no longer just another city on the map. It had become the heart of a growing empire, an empire that would shape the history of the ancient world for centuries to come. But as remarkable as Hammurabi's achievements were, Babylon's greatest days still lay ahead. Centuries later, another king would transform the city into something almost beyond imagination, a place so magnificent, travelers struggled to believe what they were seeing. His name was Nebuchadnezzar II. Nearly 1,000 years after Hammurabi, Babylon entered its greatest age. Its ruler was a king whose ambition matched the size of his empire. His name was Nebuchadnezzar II. He didn't just want Babylon to be powerful. He wanted people to see it and believe they were looking at the greatest city on earth. So he set out to rebuild Babylon from the ground up. And what he created left the ancient world in awe. As travelers approached the city, the first thing they noticed wasn't the palaces. It was the walls. They stretched for miles across the landscape, surrounding Babylon like a giant fortress. Ancient writers claimed they were so wide that chariots could race side by side along the top. Whether that was true or not, one thing is certain. The walls were unlike anything most visitors had ever seen. They sent a clear message to anyone standing outside them. Babylon was rich, Babylon was powerful, and Babylon was here to stay. But the real spectacle waited at the city's entrance. Standing before every visitor was the magnificent Ishtar Gate. Its brilliant blue glazed bricks shimmered beneath the sun. Golden images of lions, bulls, and fierce dragons covered its surface, each one representing the gods and the strength of Babylon itself. For many travelers, walking through those gates must have felt like entering another world. Inside the city, life was everywhere. The markets buzzed with activity from sunrise until nightfall. Merchants sold spices with scents carried from distant lands. Silk, precious stones, fine metals, and rare goods changed hands every day. The streets echoed with dozens of different languages as traders, soldiers, priests, diplomats, and travelers crossed paths from every corner of the known world. Babylon wasn't just a city. It was the crossroads of an empire. At its heart stood enormous temples dedicated to Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. Towering above everything else were massive step structures known as ziggurats. Built layer upon layer, they seemed to climb toward the heavens themselves. To the people of Babylon, these weren't simply buildings. They were bridges between earth and the divine. But no wonder captured people's imagination more than one legendary place: the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. According to ancient accounts, lush trees, colorful flowers, flowing streams, and cascading waterfalls covered giant terraces that rose high above the city. It was said that Nebuchadnezzar built the gardens for his queen, a woman who longed for the green mountains of her homeland and struggled with the flat, dusty landscape of Babylon. If the stories are true, the Hanging Gardens would have been one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. A mountain filled with living plants, growing in the middle of the desert. But here's where the mystery begins. Despite centuries of searching, no one has ever found undeniable proof that the Hanging Gardens actually existed. Some historians believe they were real. Their remains simply lost beneath centuries of destruction. Others think the gardens may have stood in an entirely different city. And over time, the stories became linked to Babylon instead. We still don't know the answer, and perhaps that's part of what makes the legend so enduring. For more than 2,000 years, the Hanging Gardens have remained one of history's greatest mysteries, and one of the legendary 7 wonders of the ancient world. By now, Babylon had become far more than the capital of an empire. It had become a symbol of unimaginable wealth, extraordinary power, and human ambition on a scale the world had never seen before. To many people, Babylon seemed almost too magnificent to be real. But Babylon's greatness wasn't measured only by its towering walls or its magnificent palaces. Its people believed their city stood at the very center of the universe, protected by powerful gods, and watched over by the stars themselves. To truly understand Babylon, we first have to understand what its people believed. To the people of Babylon, their city was far more than a place to live. It was sacred. They believed it was the home of the gods, a place where the heavens and the earth were deeply connected. Religion wasn't just part of daily life. It was woven into everything they did. Before marching into battle, kings sought the guidance of the gods. Before planting their fields, farmers prayed for a good harvest. Even the biggest decisions, whether to wage war crown a new ruler, or begin a major building project were often made only after searching for signs from the heavens. Above all the Babylonian gods stood one name, Marduk. He was the protector of Babylon, the guardian of its people, and the king of the gods. Every year, thousands gathered for a great festival in his honor. The city came alive with celebrations, ceremonies, and processions. At the center of it all was the king himself. He entered Marduk's great temple, where priests performed ancient rituals believed to secure the god's blessing for another year. As long as Marduk watched over Babylon, the people believed their city would remain safe. But Babylon's priests weren't only religious leaders. They were also some of the greatest scholars of the ancient world. Night after night, they climbed to the tops of the city's towering ziggurats. From there, far above the streets below, they studied the sky with remarkable patience. They carefully tracked the movements of the planets. They recorded eclipses. They mapped the stars, searching for patterns they believed revealed messages from the gods. To them, the heavens were more than beautiful. They were a language, one that, if understood correctly, could reveal the future. While many of their conclusions were shaped by religious beliefs, their careful observations laid the foundation for something far more lasting: astronomy. Many of the constellations we recognize today, and even parts of the zodiac, can trace their roots back to the work of Babylonian skywatchers thousands of years ago. Yet despite all these achievements, one story would become even more famous than the city itself: the story of the Tower of Babel. According to religious books, humanity once spoke a single language. Together, people began building a tower so tall it would reach into the heavens. But God saw their pride. He confused their languages, so they could no longer understand one another. Unable to work together, they abandoned the tower and scattered across the earth. It's one of the most famous stories in history. But where did it come from? Many historians believe the tale may have been inspired by Babylon's enormous ziggurats. These massive step temples dominated the city skyline. From miles away, they appeared to rise toward the clouds, almost as if they were trying to touch the heavens themselves. Was the Tower of Babel based on a real building? Or was it simply a powerful symbol created to teach a lesson? We may never know. But that's the fascinating thing about Babylon. The deeper we explore its past, the harder it becomes to separate history from legend. The two have become so intertwined that even today, they continue to fuel one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. 4 generations. Babylon seemed untouchable. Its walls were enormous. Its wealth was unmatched. Its people believed no army could ever conquer their city. But far beyond the horizon, a new power was rising. A king who had already defeated kingdom after kingdom. And now, he had set his sights on Babylon. His name was Cyrus the Great. 4 generations. Babylon stood behind its massive walls, convinced that no army on earth could ever conquer it. And honestly, it wasn't hard to see why. The city's defenses were legendary. Its towering walls surrounded Babylon for miles. Watchtowers guarded every entrance. And right through the heart of the city flowed the mighty Euphrates River, providing fresh water even during the longest siege. To the people of Babylon, their city seemed invincible. But in 539 BC, everything changed. A new enemy had arrived. His name was Cyrus the Great, ruler of the rapidly expanding Persian Empire. By then, Cyrus had already defeated kingdom after kingdom. Each victory brought him closer to one final prize: Babylon. When his army reached the city, most people expected a long and brutal siege. Months, maybe even years. After all, how do you capture a city protected by walls that seemed impossible to cross? But Cyrus had no intention of attacking the walls. Instead, he came up with a plan that was as bold as it was brilliant. His soldiers dug channels upstream, diverting part of the Euphrates River. Slowly, the water level began to fall. As the river grew shallower, a hidden path emerged beneath Babylon's defenses. Then, under the cover of darkness, Persian soldiers quietly made their way through the riverbed and slipped inside the city. According to ancient accounts, many of Babylon's citizens were celebrating a festival that very night. Music filled the streets. People gathered to eat, drink, and celebrate, completely unaware that enemy soldiers were already inside the walls. By the time the alarm spread across the city, it was too late. The mighty Babylon, The city that had dominated the ancient world for centuries had fallen. What's surprising is what happened next. Babylon wasn't burned to the ground. Its temples weren't destroyed. Its people weren't wiped out. Instead, Cyrus chose a very different path. He treated the city with respect. He allowed many local traditions and religious practices to continue. He restored temples, honored Babylon's gods, and presented himself not simply as a conqueror, but as Babylon's rightful new king. For most of the city's people, life went on. The markets reopened. The temples remained active. The streets were still filled with people. From the outside, Babylon looked much the same as it always had. But history had taken a turn that could never be undone. The city still stood. Its walls were still standing. Its people still lived within them. Yet something fundamental had changed. Babylon was no longer the center of the world. Its age of dominance had quietly come to an end. Babylon would survive for many years after its conquest. New rulers would walk its streets. New empires would claim it as their own. Among them would be one of history's most legendary conquerors, Alexander the Great. But fate wasn't finished with Babylon just yet. The city that once believed it could never fall was about to face its final chapter. Even after the Persians conquered Babylon, the city didn't disappear overnight. Far from it. Its streets were still alive with merchants and travelers. Its great temples still towered over the skyline. And for a time, Babylon remained one of the most important cities in the ancient world. Then, nearly 2 centuries later, another legendary ruler arrived. His name was Alexander the Great. After defeating the Persian Empire in 331 BC, Alexander entered Babylon, not as a destroyer, but as an admirer. He was captivated by the city's beauty, its history, and its sheer scale. In fact, he dreamed of making Babylon the capital of his vast empire, an empire that stretched from Greece all the way to India. He ordered repairs to the city's temples. Plans were drawn for new buildings and grand projects. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Babylon was about to begin a new golden age. But history had other plans. In 323 BC, while still in Babylon, Alexander suddenly fell ill. No one expected what came next. Just days later, at only 32 years old, the man who had conquered much of the known world was dead. Even today, no one knows exactly what killed him. Some historians believe he died from disease. Others suspect poisoning. There are even more unusual theories, but the truth has been lost to history. And with Alexander's death, his empire quickly began to fall apart. His generals fought among themselves. The lands he had conquered were divided. New kingdoms rose. New capitals were built. And slowly, the world's attention drifted away from Babylon. Without the support of a great empire, the city began to fade. Its magnificent buildings were no longer maintained. Its temples slowly fell into ruin. Bricks from its palaces were carried away to build other cities. The crowded markets grew quieter. The streets that had once echoed with countless languages became silent. Year after year, nature reclaimed what people had believed would last forever. Sand drifted over abandoned roads. Wind swept through empty temples. Walls that had once seemed indestructible began to crumble. Little by little, Babylon disappeared. Not in a single battle, not in one catastrophic disaster, but through centuries of neglect, until the city that had inspired kings, frightened enemies, and amazed travelers was buried beneath dust and silence. And yet, Babylon's story didn't end there, because some cities are remembered not for what still stands, but for the mark they leave behind. Even after its walls crumbled, even after its people were gone, the legacy of Babylon continued to shape the world. And in many ways, it still does. Today, the ruins of Babylon are quiet. Broken walls, scattered bricks, and the wind sweeping across a land that was once the center of the ancient world. It's almost impossible to imagine that this silent place was once home to mighty kings, towering temples, and one of history's greatest civilizations. Yet Babylon's legacy never truly disappeared. Its laws influenced future civilizations. Its astronomers helped shape our understanding of the skies. And its legends, from the Tower of Babel to the Hanging Gardens, continue to inspire people thousands of years later. Babylon reminds us of something every great empire eventually learns. No kingdom lasts forever. Power fades. Cities fall. But the stories they leave behind can outlive them all. And perhaps that's why Babylon is still remembered today. Not because its walls survived, but because its story refused to die. If you enjoyed this journey into the ancient world, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Which forgotten empire, lost city, or ancient mystery should we uncover next? Until next time, remember, history is full of stories you were never told.